The conference room felt smaller than usual that Tuesday morning. My manager, Elliott Thornberry, sat across from me with his leather portfolio unopened, fingers drumming against the mahogany table. Human Resources Director Monica Walsh occupied the chair to his right, her expression professionally blank. The third person in the room was someone I'd never seen before. A kid, maybe 23, wearing an ill-fitting suit and a confident smirk that hadn't yet been earned. Lysandra, we're making some organizational changes, Elliott began, not quite meeting my eyes. We've decided to take the infrastructure division in a different direction. 8 years. I'd given this company 8 years of 60-hour weeks, midnight emergency calls, and solutions nobody else could architect. I'd built their entire server infrastructure from the ground up. And now, apparently, they were going in a different direction. What kind of direction? I kept my voice level. We're bringing in fresh perspectives, new energy. Elliott gestured toward the smirking kid. This is Austin Thornberry. He'll be assuming your responsibilities effective immediately. Thornberry. The same last name wasn't even a coincidence they tried to hide. That's when I understood. This wasn't about performance. This wasn't about restructuring. This was about nepotism in its purest, most shameless form. Before we continue, if you're finding value in this story, there's a small favor. The journey to 5,000 subscribers is one step away from you hitting that button. No pressure, just an invitation to be part of this community. Now, back to what happened next. My name is Lysandra Castellano, and until that morning, I was the senior infrastructure architect at Helix Dynamics, a mid-sized tech company in Boston. My title barely scratched the surface of what I actually did. I designed, implemented, and maintained every critical system that kept the company running. I wasn't born into privilege or handed opportunities on a silver platter. My parents immigrated from a small town, worked 2 jobs each, and taught me that respect is earned through competence and integrity. They showed me what it meant to work hard while never losing sight of your humanity. That upbringing gave me something more valuable than any Ivy League education: the ability to see people for who they really are, not just their titles or their last names. I looked at Austin Thornberry, this kid who probably couldn't configure a basic firewall, and then back at Elliott. I understand, I said calmly. When do you need me to transition my responsibilities? Elliott blinked, clearly surprised by my lack of resistance. End of day, we'll need all your access credentials, documentation, and keys. Of course. I stood up, smoothed my blazer. Thank you for the opportunity. The confusion on Elliott's face was almost worth it. Almost. I walked back to my office, soon to be Austin's office, and sat down at my desk for the last time. My hands weren't shaking. My mind was crystal clear, because Elliott had made one catastrophic miscalculation: the server licensing system that ran Helix Dynamics' entire operation, the proprietary architecture that processed millions in transactions daily, the infrastructure that Elliott thought he was handing over to his incompetent nephew. It was mine, legally, completely, indisputably mine. 5 years ago, when Helix was struggling with scalability issues, I'd developed a custom licensing solution on my own time, using my own resources. I'd implemented it into their systems, made their growth possible, and never asked for anything beyond my salary. The intellectual property agreement I'd signed covered work created within the scope of employment using company resources. This didn't qualify. My patent attorney had confirmed it 3 times. I'd never planned to do anything with this leverage. I wasn't motivated by greed or revenge fantasies. I'd been content being the person who kept the lights on, who solved the unsolvable problems, who showed up when others couldn't. But Elliott had changed the equation. I spent the next 6 hours creating the most comprehensive transition documentation of my career. Every system, every process, every password and protocol. Everything except one small detail: the fact that the licensing server would stop authenticating in exactly 14 days when my personal renewal period expired. At 5 o'clock, I boxed up my personal items: my MIT coffee mug, the photo of my parents at my graduation, the small succulent plant that had somehow survived 3 years of my neglect. Austin appeared in the doorway, hands in his pockets, that same smirk plastered across his face. "So, you're the genius I'm replacing," he said. "Uncle Elliott says you built some pretty complex stuff. The documentation is on the shared drive, I replied, not looking up. Everything you need should be there. Cool, cool. I mean, how complicated can it be, right? Servers are basically just computers. I smiled, actually smiled. You're absolutely right. I'm sure you'll do great. I handed my badge and keys to Monica at the security desk. She at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Lysandra. For what it's worth, I argued against this. I appreciate that, Monica. Really. I walked out of Helix Dynamics for the last time at 5:47 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. The Boston air was crisp, autumn just beginning to assert itself. I felt lighter than I had in years. The next morning, I called Lawrence Fitzgerald, CEO of Quantum Ridge Technologies, Helix's biggest competitor. We'd met at a conference 2 years earlier and maintained a professional relationship since. Lawrence was everything Elliott wasn't: brilliant, ethical, and genuinely interested in innovation over politics. Lysandra Castellano, Lawrence's warm voice came through the phone. To what do I owe the pleasure? I have a proposition that might interest you, I said. Are you familiar with Helix Dynamics' infrastructure capabilities? Intimately. They've been eating our lunch in scalability for the past 3 years. Their transaction processing speeds are untouchable in our market segment. How would you like to own the technology that makes that possible? The pause on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. I'm listening. We met that afternoon at a coffee shop in Cambridge, neutral territory. I brought my patent documentation, architectural diagrams, and most importantly, the licensing agreements that proved ownership. Lawrence reviewed everything with the focus of a man who built his company from a dorm room startup to a $100 million enterprise. His legal counsel, Amanda Reeves, sat beside him, making notes on her tablet. This is legitimate, Amanda finally said. The IP is clearly yours. Helix has been operating under what amounts to an informal licensing agreement, which expires in 13 days, I added. Lawrence leaned back in his chair. What happens when it expires? Their entire server infrastructure stops authenticating. Transaction processing halts. Customer portals go dark. Essentially, the company stops functioning until they either renew the license or rebuild their entire system from scratch. How long would a rebuild take? With their current talent, assuming they even understand what needs to be rebuilt, 18 months minimum, more likely 2 years. Lawrence whistled softly. And you're offering to sell this to us because? Because yesterday, Helix Dynamics fired me to make room for the CEO's nephew. A kid fresh out of college with no relevant experience and a sense of entitlement that fills a room. Nepotism. Lawrence's expression hardened. I've built Quantum Ridge on merit. Every single person in my company earned their position. I know, that's why I'm here. What's your number? I'd spent the previous evening running calculations. The value to Quantum Ridge wasn't just the technology, it was the market devastation of their primary competitor. Helix Dynamics would collapse without this infrastructure. Their clients would need a new vendor immediately. Quantum Ridge, armed with the superior technology, would be the obvious choice. $450 million, I said. $200 million upfront. The remaining $250 million based on performance milestones over the next 3 years. Amanda's eyes widened slightly, but Lawrence's expression didn't change. That's substantial. The market analysis supports it. Helix processes approximately $2 billion in transactions annually. When their system fails, conservatively 70% of that business becomes available. Quantum Ridge, equipped with this technology, captures the majority. We're talking about $1 billion in new annual revenue within 18 months. You've done your homework. I've had 8 years to understand exactly how valuable this technology is. Lawrence extended his hand. I'll need a week for due diligence and board approval. You have 13 days before this becomes much more complicated. I'd recommend moving quickly. We shook hands. The next 6 days were a blur of legal reviews, technical audits, and contract negotiations. Amanda Reeves was thorough, as any good attorney should be. She verified every aspect of my ownership claims, interviewed my patent attorney, and reviewed the original development documentation. Quantum Ridge's technical team, led by their CTO Ryan McClintock, examined the architecture. Ryan was a brilliant engineer, someone I'd respected from afar for years. Watching him work through my code, seeing the moment he understood the elegance of the solution, was more satisfying than any performance review Elliott had ever given me. "This is exceptional work," Ryan said during our technical review. "The load balancing alone is years ahead of industry standard. How did you develop this?" "Nights and weekends over about 14 months. I was solving a specific scalability problem Helix was facing. The elegant solution required rethinking how server licensing could function at the architectural level. And they let you retain ownership. They never asked who owned it. They just assumed because it was running on their infrastructure, it belonged to them." Ryan shook his head. "Their loss is definitely our gain." On day 7, Lawrence called me into Quantum Ridge's executive conference room. The entire board of directors sat around an impressive glass table. The view overlooked Boston Harbor, autumn sunlight dancing off the water. "Miss Castellano," board chair Helen Voss began, "we've completed our due diligence. The technical assessment confirms your technology is everything you represented. The legal review confirms your ownership is uncontested. The financial modeling supports your valuation." I waited. This was either very good or surprisingly bad. "We'd like to make one modification to your proposal," Helen continued. My stomach tightened slightly. "In addition to the $450 million acquisition price, we'd like to offer you the position of Chief Technology Officer at Quantum Ridge. Base salary of $350,000 plus equity package and performance bonuses. You'd report directly to Lawrence and have full authority over our technology direction." I hadn't expected this. I'd planned for the sale, for the financial security, for the satisfaction of watching Helix face consequences for their short-sighted nepotism. I hadn't planned for a new beginning. "I accept," I said. The contracts were signed that afternoon. $200 million transferred into an escrow account pending final delivery. My first day at Quantum Ridge was scheduled for the following Monday, which gave me 3 days to watch Helix dynamics implode. I didn't have to wait long. Day 12, a Friday. I was settling into my new office at Quantum Ridge when my old work phone, I'd kept the number temporarily, rang. Austin Thornberry. I let it go to voicemail. "Hey, Lysandra, it's Austin. So we're getting some weird error messages on the server system. Something about license authentication. The documentation you left doesn't mention anything about this. Could you give me a call back? Thanks." His voice had lost that confident smirk. I didn't call back. Day 13, Saturday. My phone rang 6 times. Austin twice, Elliott 3 times, and once from a number I didn't recognize but assumed was someone else from Helix's increasingly panicked infrastructure team. I spent the day at my parents' house in Brookline, helping my father repair the fence in their backyard. Honest, physical work. My mother made pasta from scratch, the way her mother had taught her. We didn't talk about Helix or Quantum Ridge or $450 million. We talked about my cousin's new baby, about the community garden my parents volunteered at, about whether the Red Sox had any hope next season. This was what Elliott had never understood. Success without integrity is just numbers on a screen. My parents had taught me that wealth means nothing if you lose yourself acquiring it, but wealth acquired by standing up for your worth while watching the consequences of someone else's unethical behavior. That felt like justice. Day 14, Sunday, the calls became more frequent, desperate. Elliott left a voicemail at 9 a.m. "Lysandra, we need to talk about the server licensing system. There seems to be a critical issue that needs your immediate attention. Please call me back regardless of our previous organizational changes." Organizational changes. He couldn't even say, "firing you to install my incompetent nephew." At 2 p.m., Monica Walsh called. "Lysandra, I know this is incredibly inappropriate to ask, but we're facing a potential complete system failure tomorrow. Elliott is asking, begging, really, for any assistance you might provide, please." I almost felt bad for Monica. Almost. At 6 p.m., my phone rang from a number with a New York area code. I answered. "Miss Castellano. This is Gregory Hammond. I'm the chairman of the board at Helix Dynamics. I understand there may be some miscommunication regarding server licensing that you developed during your tenure with us." Miscommunication. These people were masters of euphemism. "There's no miscommunication, Mr. Hammond. I developed proprietary technology on my own time using my own resources. I allowed Helix to use it as a courtesy. That courtesy has expired. I see. What would it take to renew this? Courtesy? That's no longer possible. The technology has been acquired by another party. The transfer is already complete. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I checked if the call had dropped. Another party, Gregory finally said, his voice carefully controlled. Would you be able to disclose which party? You'll find out tomorrow morning when your systems fail and your clients start looking for alternative vendors. I'd recommend having a communications strategy prepared. I hung up. That evening, I met Lawrence and Ryan at a restaurant in the Seaport District. Tomorrow, the technology would officially transfer to Quantum Ridge's infrastructure. Tomorrow, Helix Dynamics would discover exactly how much they'd taken for granted. How are you feeling? Lawrence asked over appetizers. Honestly, calm. I didn't want this. I would have happily stayed at Helix, doing good work, solving problems. Elliott made a choice based on personal preference over professional merit. Now he gets to experience the consequences. Ryan raised his glass. To consequences. And to new beginnings. We toasted. Monday morning is going to be chaotic, Lawrence said. Helix's clients will panic. We need to be ready with migration solutions, customer support capacity, and clear messaging. I've already drafted the technical migration protocols, I said. Any Helix client can be onboarded to our system within 72 hours. We'll need to staff up customer support and sales, but the infrastructure can handle the volume. You built this just over the weekend? Ryan looked impressed. I've had 8 years to think about how this technology could scale. I just never had the resources at Helix to implement it properly. Lawrence smiled. You have the resources now. Monday morning, 6 a.m. I was already at Quantum Ridge when the first reports came through. Helix Dynamics' entire system had gone dark at 12:01 a.m. when the licensing authentication finally expired. Their customer service lines were overwhelmed within an hour. Transaction processing had completely halted. Client companies couldn't access their portals, couldn't process orders, couldn't retrieve critical data. By 8 a.m., trade publications were reporting the outage. By 9 a.m., Helix's stock had dropped 12%. By noon, it was down 34%. Austin Thornberry called my old number 11 times before apparently giving up. Elliott called once, left no message. Gregory Hammond's office released a statement at 2 p.m. attributing the outage to unforeseen technical difficulties and promising restoration within days. They truly had no idea what they were dealing with. Quantum Ridge's sales team began receiving calls around 10 a.m. Helix clients looking for immediate alternatives. By end of day, we had 47 companies requesting emergency migrations. I worked alongside Ryan's team, personally overseeing the first wave of transitions. These were businesses in crisis, their operations crippled through no fault of their own. They deserved better than to be casualties of Elliott's nepotism. By Thursday of that week, Quantum Ridge had onboarded 93 former Helix clients. Our revenue projections for the quarter had been exceeded in 4 days. Helix Dynamics released another statement on Friday announcing they were rebuilding infrastructure with enhanced security and capabilities. The timeline they provided was 18 months. I'd been generous in my estimate, apparently. Their stock continued to fall. Client contracts were being terminated en masse. Industry analysts were writing obituaries for what had been, just a week earlier, a successful mid-sized tech company. I felt no joy in this. Helix had employed hundreds of people, good people who showed up, did their jobs, and didn't deserve to suffer because their CEO valued family connections over competence. But I also hadn't created this situation. Elliott had. Monica Walsh reached out via LinkedIn the following week. I wanted you to know I've resigned from Helix. I couldn't continue working somewhere that operates like this. I should have fought harder against your termination. I'm sorry I didn't. I appreciated her message. You did what you could within an impossible situation. I hope your next position is with people who deserve your professionalism. Actually, I was hoping Quantum Ridge might be hiring for HR leadership. I connected her with Lawrence. She started 2 weeks later. Austin Thornberry disappeared from Helix's website and LinkedIn within a month. No announcement, no explanation, just quietly erased as though his brief tenure had never happened. Elliott lasted slightly longer. The board forced him out in early December, replacing him with an interim CEO tasked with damage control and potential sale of company assets. Helix Dynamics never recovered. They filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in March, 7 months after firing me. Their remaining assets were liquidated, their clients fully absorbed by competitors, primarily Quantum Ridge. The full $450 million payment cleared in June, all performance milestones having been exceeded ahead of schedule. 1 year after that conference room meeting where Elliott Thornberry handed my job to his unqualified nephew, I sat in my office at Quantum Ridge. The view overlooked the same Boston Harbor I'd seen from the boardroom on the day they'd made their offer. Chief Technology Officer, leader of an infrastructure team that had grown from 40 people to over 200. Architect of a platform now processing over $3 billion in annual transactions. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Lysandra Castellano. Miss Castellano, my name is Professor Kathleen Morrison. I teach business ethics at Boston University. I was hoping you might be willing to speak to my graduate students about your experience. Word had gotten out, as it inevitably does in the tech industry. Not from me. I'd maintained complete professional discretion. But former Helix employees had talked. Industry journalists had pieced together the story. I'd become an unintentional case study in intellectual property rights and the consequences of corporate nepotism. What specifically would you want me to discuss? The ethical considerations around intellectual property developed during employment. The responsibilities of professionals when facing organizational misconduct. How to navigate the intersection of personal rights and professional obligations. I'm not sure I'm the right person for this. I didn't set out to teach lessons. I simply protected what was legally mine. That's exactly why you're the right person. You didn't act out of revenge. You acted from principle. There's a difference, and it's one my students need to understand. I agreed to speak to her class. The lecture hall was more intimidating than any boardroom I'd faced. 70 graduate students, all watching, all judging, all trying to figure out if I was a hero or a villain or something in between. I'm not here to tell you I was right or wrong, I began. I'm here to tell you what happened and let you draw your own conclusions. I walked them through the timeline, developing the technology on my own time, implementing it as a courtesy to my employer. The firing, the sale, the collapse. A student raised her hand. Didn't you feel guilty about all the people at Helix who lost their jobs? Every single day, I answered honestly. But I didn't fire those people. The leadership that chose nepotism over competence did. I didn't create a system dependent on technology they didn't own without ever verifying ownership. They did. I didn't force them into impossible decisions. Their own choices did. Another student, but you could have handled it differently. You could have warned them, given them time to transition. You're right, I could have. And if Elliott had been honest with me, if he'd approached me with respect and offered fair compensation for 8 years of excellent work, I would have. But respect is a two-way street. When you treat people as disposable, don't be surprised when they stop prioritizing your needs. The discussion continued for 90 minutes. Some students thought I'd been justified. Others thought I'd been vindictive. Most fell somewhere in the middle, wrestling with the complexity of a situation that didn't offer easy moral absolutes. Professor Morrison thanked me afterward. You gave them exactly what they needed, ambiguity. The real world doesn't come with clear right and wrong answers. Learning to navigate that complexity is what separates competent professionals from great ones. I'd never thought of it that way. Driving home that evening, I called my parents. They were at the community garden, my father reported, harvesting late-season tomatoes. How's the new job treating you? He asked, the same question he'd asked every week for the past year. It's good, Papa. Really good. And you're treating people right, not letting success change who you are? I'm trying. That's all anyone can do, Mija. Try. That conversation, more than any board meeting or contract signing or media coverage, reminded me why I'd made the choices I'd made. Not for revenge, not for money, but because there had to be consequences when people in power treated others as disposable. My parents hadn't raised me to accept injustice quietly. They'd raised me to stand up for my worth while never losing sight of my humanity. to fight for what was right without becoming the kind of person who inflicts unnecessary harm. Elliott had made his choice. I'd made mine. Today, I'm sitting in my office at Quantum Ridge, preparing for a board meeting where we'll discuss expansion into new markets. The company employs over 800 people now, every one of them hired based on what they bring to the organization, not who they know. My phone rings, it's my father. Mija, your mother and I are going to the community center later. We're teaching a citizenship class for new immigrants. Want to join us? I'd love that, Papa. What time? 6 o'clock. And bring that humility your mother's always worried you might lose. I laugh. I'll pack extra, just in case. This is what matters, not the stock prices or the press coverage or the professional accolades, but staying connected to the values that shaped me, to the people who taught me that worth isn't measured in dollars or titles. Elliott Thornberry taught me something valuable too, though not what he intended. He taught me that you can't take people for granted. That treating others as disposable has consequences. That in a knowledge economy, the actual knowledge matters more than the org chart. He taught me to value myself, to protect my work, to understand my worth not in terms of arrogance but in terms of fair exchange. And in a strange way, by forcing me out of Helix, he gave me the opportunity to build something better. Something that reflects the values my parents instilled in me. Something that creates opportunities based on merit rather than connections. The server license that I sold for $450 million wasn't just technology. It was proof that competence matters, that preparation meets opportunity, that standing up for yourself isn't the same as tearing others down. Would I do it all again the same way? Probably not exactly. I'd communicate more clearly up front. I'd formalize agreements sooner. I'd try harder to protect the innocent employees who suffered when Helix collapsed. But would I accept being fired to make room for an unqualified nephew? Would I hand over technology I'd built without fair compensation? Would I pretend that nepotism is just how business works? Never. Some lines can't be crossed without consequences. Some compromises cost more than they're worth. Some battles need to be fought, not for revenge, but for principle. That Tuesday morning when Elliott Thornberry handed my job to his nephew, he thought he was exercising power. He thought he was doing his family a favor. He thought I'd be another disposable employee who'd accept injustice quietly. He was wrong on all counts. And in being wrong, he inadvertently gave me the greatest gift of my career. The opportunity to prove that merit matters, that values have value, that treating people with dignity and respect isn't just moral, it's smart business. The keys I handed over that day opened doors I'd never imagined. The thanks I offered carried no sarcasm, because in a strange way, I was genuinely grateful. Grateful for clarity about who Elliott really was. Grateful for the push I needed to leave comfortable mediocrity. Grateful for the chance to build something that reflected my values rather than compromising them for a paycheck. Quantum Ridge isn't perfect. No organization is. But it's built on principles that matter: merit over connections, competence over convenience, long-term relationships over short-term gains. And every time we hire someone based on what they can do rather than who they know, every time we promote based on performance rather than politics, every time we choose the harder right over the easier wrong, we prove that different is possible. Elliott Thornberry fired me to hire his nephew. I said thanks and handed over my keys. 14 days later, I sold the server license to his rival for $450 million. But the real victory wasn't the money. It was building something better. Something that proves every single day that the system can change, that merit can matter, that people in power can choose differently. That's legacy worth more than any acquisition price. That's success worth celebrating. And that's why, when my parents ask if I'm staying humble, if I'm remembering where I came from, if I'm treating people right, the answer is always yes. Because that was never about Helix Dynamics or Quantum Ridge or Elliott Thornberry. It was always about the kind of person I choose to be, regardless of titles or bank balances or professional victories. My parents taught me that, and no amount of success will ever let me forget it. Before you go, if this story resonated with you, if it sparked something or made you think differently, that subscribe button is still there. We're building something here, a community of 5,000 people who believe stories matter, that merit matters, that how we treat each other matters. No pressure, just an invitation. Either way, thank you for your time, for listening, for being here. Sometimes the best revenge is building something better than what tried to break you. Sometimes justice looks like consequences catching up to people who thought they were untouchable. And sometimes, the ending you didn't plan turns out better than anything you could have imagined.